In this guide, we're going to take you from adult to nymph, pupa, and larva.
In this video series, we're going to cover the main things you need to know to match the hatch. Matching the hatch has always seemed like a good idea to me.
So let's start with a quick lesson on how to recognize the main flying insects. If you get in the middle of a midge hatch, you're going to know that you're in the middle of a midge hatch because you'll see a lot of little small bugs that look a lot like mosquitoes but are tiny in comparison even to a mosquito flying around. So this is a midge hatch. This handsome guy with the beady eyes is a mayfly. They always have 2 or 3 tails, a tapered body, and the adults have upright wings. An adult on the water will look something like this guy. Next we have the caddisfly with its swept back wings. This is an October caddis. When you run into a hatch of these guys, they look a lot like moths. And the last of the big 4 is the stonefly with those distinctive legs and wings.
So I want to talk about the simple version of how to match the hatch. If you get really interested in matching the hatch, I'd suggest you pick up a couple of books by Dave Hughes. The first one is Essential Trout Flies, and what Hughes does in that book is he covers a lot of different kinds of flies, dries, nymphs, but he talks about which ones mimic which insects. And then Dave Hughes also wrote the Handbook of Hatches, which is a good book if you don't mind learning a little Latin. Paul Weimer also wrote a book called The Bug Book. One of his quotes there is, "I'm about to commit heresy here. Most hatch charts are fantasy. There are just too many variables for a static hatch chart to encompass them." And we are going to get to hatch charts. We won't get to them here, but we will in a later video. In this video, we're going to cover the basic things you need to know to match the hatch. As we cover these, I'm going to simplify some things. So that means there's going to be some things left out. There's going to be some things that aren't perfectly accurate, but that's okay because I'm not worried about accurate. I'm worried about useful.
In the Handbook of Hatches, Dave Hughes mentions that there are 5 things that we can match when we're matching the hatch: the size, the shape, the color, the behavior, and the habitat. Let's think about how these might work from a practical standpoint when we're on the water.
So when we're out on the water, we pay attention to 5 things. The size of the fly, that's the most important. The shape is the fly pattern. So you'll notice if you look at flies that a Hendrickson and an Adams basically have the same shape. They're tied a little differently, but they basically have the same shape. They have an upright wing, a narrow tapered body, and a thin tail. So the shape is second. The third is color. Those are the 3 things that the fly has to contribute: size, shape, color. Those come from the flies. And what I think is those 3 things, once you're standing there in the river or on the bank with your fly rod and you're looking down into your fly box, your choices for size, shape, and color are done. You can choose from what's in your fly box. So you don't need to know that that's a BWO. You don't need to know that that's a yellow Sally. You need some idea of what the shape of the fly is, and what flies in your box are basically the same shape. And you need the color, which you can get by observation, and the size you can get by observation. How else can you get that? Size and shape you can get by netting. I carry sometimes a little aquarium net, one of the little small ones, and just stick it in through a loop on my chest pack. And so sometimes I'll pull it out, and I'll reach down and scoop some of the top, what's on the top of the water off. The last 2 items in that list, behavior, that's how the fly acts on the water, and environment, have to do with where you fish those flies. And we'll cover that a little later on. What we're going to do in the rest of this video is we're going to look at those items, those first three items, size, shape, and color, and talk about how you mimic each one of the major fly species with those size, shape, and color attributes. So let's talk about size. Fly fishermen tend to talk about size in terms of hook. So they'll say, that's a number 20 BWO, or a size 22, that's a 22 BWO. I'll give you an idea of the size of the hook. I can fit two size 22 standard dry fly hooks crossways, lengthwise on a standard US dime and still have a little space in the middle. A size 10 standard dry fly hook barely goes across a dime. So you can see a size 22 is really tiny, and a size 10 is starting to get large. Size 8, bigger. The smaller the number, the bigger the hook, until you get to size 1, and then the next bigger hook is a 1/0 or a 1/0 hook, 2/0, so on and so forth. They go up at least as high as 10/0. And those hooks can be very large. How do you get used to picking flies that way? Get a natural, put a natural in your hand. Grab a fly out of your fly box and put it in your hand next to the natural. And just kind of compare them. Yeah, okay, that's a size 18 fly out of my fly box, and that's about the same size. So that's what a size 18 looks like. So that's how you get used to size. Shape or pattern. You will learn some standard patterns, but my suggestion is stick with patterns that you understand and patterns that you have a general idea of what flies they represent. So for example, if you're trying to represent a caddis, an adult caddis dry fly, one of the standard patterns that you're going to have a choice of is a trough caddis. Most every fly shop carries a trough caddis. There's some other patterns that mimic the down wing on a caddis, like the picture I showed you earlier. And you might want to choose one of those. But there are 100 different patterns for a caddis dry fly. Just pick one that you like the look of and that you understand, and pick several sizes and several colors, or tie several sizes and several colors. There's no need for 600 different patterns of a dry fly caddis. The third idea, or the third thing, is color. And color, you got to do by inspection. The flies on your local stream are likely a different color than the flies on my local stream. And that's true even of the same insect. So an October caddis on your stream might be a little bit darker orange than the October caddis on my stream. The October caddis on my stream might even have some yellow mixed in, or might have some spots of brown or black mixed in. The only way you're going to know that is to actually catch a fly from that stream. The last thing I can suggest to you about picking flies and matching the hatch is when you're in a particular area. If you go to Yellowstone, find a fly shop in the Yellowstone area, go into the fly shop and say, hey, what are they biting on? That's going to give you size, shape, color. And here's the next question that we're going to get to in the next set of videos. How are they fishing them? In a video that I just did, I tied or showed how to tie a Griffith's gnat. A Griffith's gnat imitates a bundle of midges, and it's a dry fly, so it sits on the top of the water. One way to fish a Griffith's gnat is dead drift. So you cast it out, you do everything you can to avoid any drag in the line, design the leader so it throws some extra slack in the leader, something like that. Some people will fish a Griffith's gnat dead drift for however long you get a dead drift, 10, 12 feet, and then they'll tug it under and swing it back across. That's the behavior of a fly. You're giving it its behavior, but that's the method of fishing, which is what you're asking. You may also get an answer that gives you the environment. They're throwing them up against the banks. when they see an undercut bank. So that'll give you an idea. And we will talk in more detail in later videos about these items. But these are the three things that you should get from this video: the size, the shape, and the color are the first three things you want to match if you're trying to match the hatch.
Until now, we've only talked about adults. We need different fly shapes to imitate immature aquatic insects. Let's take a look at the life cycles of aquatic insects.
Incomplete metamorphosis goes egg, nymph, adult. There's some other things that come in, I say, between the nymph and the adult that you may want to know, like stillborn, emerger, stuck in the shuck. Then the adult fly, for a mayfly in particular, can be a spinner, that's only a mayfly, or it can be a spent spinner, which same thing, we'll talk about that later. So the species that you're going to need to know, and that we'll talk about and actually show you, are mayfly and stonefly that have a 3-stage life cycle. There's a 4-stage life cycle. The 4 stages are egg, larva, pupa, and adult, which we also call a dun. Between the pupa and the dun, there's the emerger, the stuck in the shuck, and the stillborn.
The good news is you really don't need to know a lot of details about that. Let me give you an example. Suppose you see somebody out fly fishing one day and you ask him what he's doing. And he says, "I'm nymphing." And so you say, "Oh, what fly are you using?" And he shows you the fly that I've got on the screen right now. That fly is one way to imitate this bug, which is not a nymph. So the only time you really need to know whether it's a nymph or a pupa or a larva is when you're trying to find a picture of it to imitate. And if you just pump 60 of them out of the stomach of a 2-pound trout, you really don't even care whether it's a nymph or a larva or a pupa, because you can look at it and see what it looks like. So let's finish this video up with some standard flies that you might select. You can't go wrong with a red and black zebra midge to imitate midge larva. The pheasant tail and the copper john are good mayfly imitations, while the waltz worm and the hare's ear are good caddis imitations. And finally, we probably want to throw a soft hackle into the mix, just for those situations when nothing else works.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe for all our videos and tight lines.